Good evening, Mercer Island community. My name is Fred Rundle. I'm our superintendent of our great school district and the proud superintendent of our school district. Tonight we're here to walk through, for the second year in a row, some of the ins and outs of our current budget and our fiscal priorities, as well as some of our human resource impacts. Joining me tonight are some incredible colleagues who help run our district. They're out in front at times and they're behind the scenes at times as well. So let me begin with our finance team and begin introductions.
Hi, I'm Matt Sullivan, Executive Director of Finance and Operations.
Hi, I'm Kay Adams, Director of Finance.
And to my left, I have the Human Resource team here, Rosie Burns.
Rosie Burns, Director of Human Resources.
And Erin Battersby, Executive Director of Compliance, Legal Affairs, and Human Resources.
Great. So we'll go ahead and get started here tonight. I'm going to go ahead and just start off with some of our outcomes and what we hope to accomplish tonight. The first thing is I'm incredibly proud of our school district and the financial position that we put ourselves in. We're in a very different place this year than we were just 1 year ago, but we also have to remember that there's still a lot of work to go, and we'll talk about that this evening. I also want to continue to strengthen our connection with our community. We know that our schools and our school district cannot possibly be the outstanding place it is for our students and our staff and our community without that partnership. So tonight's that opportunity to continue building upon that. And then of course we want transparency. What we produce for you tonight is the same thing we've shared in all of our schools, and we'll have our last school on Thursday morning. It's one that we're continuing to share to different community members and community groups so that everyone sees that what we're trying to accomplish is together. And ultimately, hopefully that builds trust in knowing that we are all in this together, that it's not one part of the organization, it's not one sector of the community, it truly is all of us. So when we think about our financial and our human resource goals, we think about, what are those priorities we have, especially right now in a time period when budgets are being crunched by the state. We know that enrollment has been volatile, and so we're really thinking about how do we stabilize that enrollment. We know that enrollment's our biggest driver of our budget, and our team is going to talk about that tonight. We also want to think about fiscal predictability. How can we make sure that we are, in the long term, continuing to grow our fund balance at an appropriate rate and prepare ourselves so we can continue to adjust and meet the needs of our students. And finally, creating, again, transparency with our human resource processes. If you look at the words over here to my left, to your right, in the blue, we know we need to continue to amplify all of the great things that we continue to do as a school district. We need to elevate and continue to get better, and we need to do that faster and faster as we go along. And how we need to do that with our students, we need to make sure that we're attracting new families, that once they're here, we're retaining them. And for families who may have chosen to leave the district or who never chose to come in the first place, how do we get them to return and continue to choose Mercer Island Public Schools? So let's talk a little bit about budget and human resource variables and drivers. One of the drivers is, of course, state apportionment, and that's tied to the bottom driver as well, which is enrollment. Our enrollment of our students drives the amount of money that our state is sending to us, called apportionment, and those two factors right there form kind of the sandwich, the bread in the sandwich, if you will. And in between, we have contracts with our employees, the Mercer Island Education Association, representing the majority of our employees. And then, of course, we also have non-representative and administrative personnel as well. But when we're thinking about those drivers, the cost of labor is something that is extremely important for us to watch, but it's also important for us to invest in. And again, we'll talk about that throughout the evening as well. Our levies, we can't thank our voters enough. We've continued to have the great fortune of the confidence of the community to pass our levies at very favorable rates. And those levies have certainly been changing and a bit volatile themselves. We'll talk about that and some possible solutions that are on the way, although we have gotten some recent bad news out of Olympia. Our leaves, our resignations, our retirements, right now is the time when some of our employees are thinking about the future and whether or not they want to continue to be in the district for whatever reason. And so as we start to staff our schools, we have to think about that changing dynamic as we go along. And finally, our legislative action. I think we'll get into this a little bit later on this evening. We've been down in Olympia setting legislative priorities. really talking to our legislators, and we've got some good news and some bad news coming out of that. So certainly want to thank our 3 legislative representatives, Senator Wellman, Representative Sen, and Representative Tai. They are tremendous supporters of public education and our students. And so we continue to count on them for the great work that they do to kind of help us. Next, we have our PTA and our PTA advocacy. Right there is a QR code if you'd like to go on at some point and take a look at the PTA advocacy board. That they keep track of a lot of our bills for us and keep our community informed. And then we also have our MIEA partners who are also great advocates down there. And lastly, right in the middle is our school board. Our board of directors, our 5-member directors, and Jody Lee, who's our current legislative rep to the board, they're doing some tremendous work and continuing to work and find ways that they can advocate for our school district. So let's talk a little bit about our students. I think it's important to start off with the changing landscape of our students over the past decade or so. If we take a look at where we were in 2012-13 to where we are today, we've seen some pretty incredible shifts, and I think it's been a really positive and value add to our school district as we become more diverse and complex racially and ethnically and culturally. And so I just point out a couple of those. First off, you can see that certainly our students who identify as Asian have been growing for a number of years. Multiracial families have been growing. Hispanic students and identities have been growing. And you'll notice that the one that has been dropping are our white students. For the first time in our school district, just this year, we're below 50% of any of our categories, and for us it's been white for a very long time. So as our demographics change, we have to continue to think about how do we meet the needs of all of our students. If we go at a little bit more of a macro scale, if you've been following any of our long-range facility planning process or our plans, you've seen this slide. And the numbers inside the gray and the blue really aren't as important as just knowing that this is noting how our enrollment has ebbed and flowed throughout the years in the Mercer Island School District. All the way over on the left, we have 1972, and then all the way over here to my right, we have 2032. 2032 is where we're out in terms of our projections, and so you can see that back in the 70s is when we were really booming as a school district. That's when we were experiencing a lot of growth in our schools. At that time, we actually had 5 elementary schools, 2 junior highs, and 1 high school. And then, as the Boeing bust occurred and some other financial factors, you can see a sharp drop-off there in the late 70s into the early 80s. That's a time when we closed 2 elementary schools, we consolidated our 2 junior highs into just 1 middle school, and we reconfigured to a 6-8 middle school model instead of the K-6 that we were before with our elementaries and 7-8 in the middle school. So as we troughed out at the bottom, when we started to climb back out, that's when we started to recognize that the lifespan of our buildings needed to be improved. So at the high school, like the building we're in tonight, at our elementary schools, our middle school, that's when we started some of our major renovation projects. It wasn't then until 2010 that we kind of had our next major project, which was here at the high school. And then obviously Northwood was built and half of the middle school there in the 2014 to 2016 range. It was in 2016 that King County started experiencing what many states, regions, counties, cities have experienced, and that is a declining birth rate. And that's really significant, as we're going to get into in the next slides, because those cohorts of students who are registering and coming into our kindergartens, that's where we're really starting to see the impact. But as the enrollment declined, and to where we are now, you can see that we kind of crested right as Northwood was opening and whatnot. We had COVID, and then we've come down. So if we take a look at that a little bit more, this is live data of where we are right now as a school district over time. We have 2017-18 school year, all the way through to the 2025-2026. If we ignore the 3 large years and those 3 large bars for a second, and really just focus in right here on 2021 or 2020-2021 to 25-26, that slow downward trend is exactly what our demographers had been predicting pre-COVID. We knew that those birth rates were dropping. We knew that there were changes in and around the economic landscape of the Puget Sound region. The difference is, of course, was right here in 2019, 2020 to 2020, 2021. That's when we saw that COVID drop of about 250 students right in there. And so that exacerbated some of the budget challenges that we have been facing, as well as many other school districts. If we zero in then into the current school year, so these are our current students, kindergarten through 12th grade, in our schools right now. We've highlighted some of the bars, and that's done very intentionally. So I want to draw your attention first to the maroon bars. Those maroon bars show our students who are newest into our schools, and then of course our seniors who are graduating out. If we take a look at just that kindergarten class this year, we have 188 current kindergartners enrolled in our schools. On the contrary, when we go out and we look over here to our seniors, you can see that there's a great delta there. In fact, we have over 250 seniors ready to graduate this spring. So that delta is certainly something that we're having to watch, because will we continue to see the increase in our enrollment over the years? Our first grade, we tend to see a jump. Kindergarten to first grade is about a 30 student jump, but last year's cohort of kindergartners started at 230. When we're down at 180, we're certainly concerned about the number of students that will be coming in to backfill our seniors. If you look at the light blue here in the middle, you have 5th and 6th grade. We're paying close attention and doing a lot of intentional work in our schools to try to think about who are those families that have kindergarten to 5th grade age students, maybe choosing private school, homeschool, online schools, and how do we attract them back for middle school? And then if you move over to the right further, we have 8th to 9th grade, and for the same reason, we track that cohort to see how many families are we able to bring back to the school district. We've been watching withdrawal trends. That is the number of students who attrit out or leave our school district, particularly between right now, the beginning of February, and then when school starts in the fall. That's when we see the most change with our students. So if we take a look pre-pandemic, 2019 or the February 2019 to the beginning of the 2019-20 school year, we had 4.5% of our students who left the school district. That was pretty normal during that time. That doesn't account for the families who do move in to offset that, but it gives you an idea of families moving for different reasons. Some choosing private school, but many others moving to new states, new countries, new locations. If we take a look then into the COVID era, the first year of COVID, you can see that that spiked greatly. We saw a 7% increase, or we saw that jump to 7%. In the next year of COVID, that jumped to 7.7%. And so those were those big drops that I was talking about in terms of we were actually seeing more students leaving than coming back in. But then if we look here to more recent trends, we've seen that drop to 5.3%, and now it's even dropped lower. Last year it dropped into the 3.8% range. So we're trending in the right direction. Our students are staying or not leaving in the same amounts, and we're actually bringing many more students in that we're losing as we go through this process. So that's where this graph comes in. This is comparing on the blue our total number of new students who enrolled from February last year to the start of this school year, and then the red are the students who left and the number of students. So you can see in elementary school, we outpaced all of our incoming students compared to students leaving. It's really only once you get into high school where you start to see that change just a little bit. So that leads us to a conversation that's begun. Again, we touched on it last year, though it still seemed a little bit further away. But our school board will be taking this conversation back up. They've already had 2 conversations, and this Thursday they're going to continue that conversation, and that is open enrollment, which is also known as choice transfer. These are students who live outside of our school district who are thinking about wanting to come to the Mercer Island School District through open enrollment. So the last time we were open was 2008, 2009. That was in the recession. And since then, as those schools grew and we had those big cohorts of students coming through, that's when we had closed, for the most part, to open enrollment. Each year, I need to report to the school board that by April 15th, I give them a report, but we're starting much earlier this school year, trying to think about that a little bit more and sooner, just in case we want to make some changes. So factors that are influencing it continues to be enrollment, how much space do we have, availability of resources, and then certainly community input that the board will be looking for in the coming weeks here as we head into the spring. Last year, we did add city staff. It's always been the case where our current staff can bring their children to the Mercer Island School District, and now we're looking at city staff having that same benefit. As we look to next year, the proposal that I just floated, some early thinking to our school board, was to think about 8th grade to 12th grade. If we're going to open up our schools, we know we want to continue to keep the program strong here at the high school. We heard loudly and clearly not to consolidate our elementary schools. Let's let them play out. Let's see where the enrollment goes, and I tend to agree wholeheartedly with that. So instead of trying to solve problems with enrollment across the whole school district, the thinking I have right now is if we think about it in a shorter grade span of 8th to 12th grade, that might be a better spot to start. We also have WIAA, which is our athletic association in the state, and there's different parameters around that for students in transferring. So lots of different factors. Please tune in Thursday or watch our board meetings because we're going to have some more very in-depth conversations. So that's the landscape with enrollment. Enrollment, of course, driving or one of the greatest drivers to our budget. But I want to bring in our finance team to talk a little bit about where do we stand financially as a school district, what improvements have we made, and where do we still need to go. So I'm going to bring in Director Sullivan and Director Adams.
Thank you, Dr. Rundle. To give some context to our conversation around school districts, financing, HR as we move forward, I'd like to do a little bit of a dive about how schools are funded, how do we account for the revenue we receive, and our outgo of expenditures. We account for that by 5 major funds. Specifically, we have the general fund. That is basically the vast majority of where our revenues come in and expenditures go out. It accounts for personnel, salaries, benefits, materials, supplies, and operating costs. Fund number 2 is our transportation fund. Fairly self-explanatory. This helps us pay and maintain our big yellow school buses and some of our smaller yellow school buses. Fund number 3 is our debt service fund. In 2014, the island, you passed a almost $100 million bond, and with that, we collect that tax dollars, the King County does, and we pay out through our debt service fund, kind of like you would pay your mortgage. Fund number 4 is our capital projects and technology. This is funded through our Cap Tech levy, which we just approved a couple years ago, and it runs for about 6 years. But it funds things like this presentation here with our audio, our visual, computers for kids, let alone minor maintenance throughout the district, carpeting, painting, etc. And then finally our ASB fund. This is our Associated Student Body Fund. This is funds that a student and club raised and goes to fund everything from proms to clubs to sports. If we look at this is our Mercer Island property tax rates for 2023. We don't quite have yet the 2024, but as a good example is where do your tax dollars go? You can see 2 of the largest pieces of this pie, the yellow section and the light blue section, that all goes to schools. State schools accounts for roughly 37%, and then locally through our EP&O, our enrichment programs and operations levy, and then our Cap Tech levy accounts for that local 21%. Now to put some context, and I'll discuss the clear decision a little bit here quickly, that was a decision back in 2017, 2018 that ruled via our state Supreme Court that public schools weren't fully funded. In turn, our legislature decided to, 1, collect more taxes at the state level, hence we saw an increase from about 24% to 37% currently in that state collected tax, in that big yellow piece of the pie. And then what they also decided to do, the legislature, without a decision from the state Supreme Court, was to put a cap on a local EP&O levy. Where do our general fund expenditures go to? Quite frankly, they go to the most important asset we have, that's our staff. And 87%, almost 87% of all of our expenditures goes to our people, our staff. About 82% comes from the general fund, and the rest comes from our Cap Tech levy. But you can see that salaries certified accounts for 43%, salaries classified about 16%, and then benefits accounts for 21.5%. detail on our enrichment programs and operation levy. The state legislature decided that there would be a cap. I think they believe this would be equitable for all districts, but it simply doesn't work that way. The levy authority was the lesser idea, $2,500 per student versus our assessed valuation. So we, Mercer Island being a property-rich or district, were dinged in the sense of we got the lesser of the two, meaning that we were assessed then in our $2,500 per student versus our assessed valuation. And even more context, pre-McCleary 17-18, we were collecting about $15, almost $16 million per year, and then the levy cap hit. And then looking at 22-23, we collect about $11.6 million. If you take 17-18 from 22-23, that's a loss of almost $4.1 million. That doesn't account for the compounding year to year to year to year.
Ready? Hi, my name's Kay, and this is what the state pays us for employees. Certified staff right now, the state pays us $75,419. Classified, $54,000, but that classified position is 8 hours a day, 260 days a year. And for an administrator, we get $111,915. To that, they add a regionalization factor, which we are at 18%, which changes. We're waiting. Uh-oh. Technical difficulties. Hold on. Okay. By adding the 18%, it raises the salaries we get paid for a certified person to $88,994. We get benefits paid for those individuals from the state, about $29,000, and then we also get PD money, professional development money, which is a little over $1,400. So for a certified staff member, we get paid from the state about $119,648, and that is only for prototypical school staffing. We're having trouble with the computer. Oh, good, here we go. What we pay for a teacher to get highly qualified, well-experienced teachers, we do believe this is a fair amount. We pay out about $147,200, and that's a difference of $27,000 per teacher, and that's for the prototypical teachers. Any teacher above that, we pay $147,200 for. And then one of the big shortfalls that the state does not pay us for is substitutes. You cannot run a school district without substitutes. People get sick. We only receive about $108,000 from the state for substitute. We pay about $1.4 million for subs, and that's a difference of about $1.3 million. Now we're going to go on to our health benefits. A few years ago, the state decided to take over our health benefits, and it's called SEB, School Employee Benefit Bureau, and they allocate us per our prototypical school state funding, which is about $4.5 million, but the benefits cost us about $6 million, which is a deficit of about $1.5 million. So it's an increase of about $1.2 million from 16-17 to now to cover all our staff members' benefits. And part of that reason is too because classified people receive full-time benefits, but the state also only pays us on what's called a full-time equivalent. So it might take 2 people to make a 1 FTE, but they're only going to pay us the benefits on that 1 FTE. So that's a big moneymaker for the state, if you ask me. This is our prototypical school that the state funds us on. If you have 333 students in an elementary school, you get to qualify for a .06 nurse, a .017 psych. You don't even get a full-time paraeducator. So, and if you can see as it moves up per grade, it does not change drastically. This has not been changed for over 20 years. One position that's not on this is our techs. And if you look at the technology change in the last 10 years, our district only qualifies for 2 technicians for the whole district. with every employee and every student having some type of device and all the other third-party softwares we have to run.
So just quickly, and I just want to talk quickly about fund balance, because this is oftentimes discussed and talked about in terms of what is our fund balance. Our fund balance is really important because that's really our savings account. Our fund balance you can think of as that rainy day fund. Well, during COVID, and I'm going to bring in Director Sullivan in a second to talk a little bit more about exactly what happened, we certainly spent that down. But our board has some expectations, and that is that we maintain a fund balance that we can go to if we should need that over time. That expectation is between 8 and 10%, and to just give you an idea, when I became the superintendent, we were almost a 1%, we were just over 2%, and actually we still owed ourselves $2 million. So if we take a look at what's happened over time, I really do want to bring in our finance team to talk about this, because this is the work of the whole school district, but this is the work of Director Adams and Executive Director Sullivan and what they've been able to do to try to help us get back on track.
Thank you, Dr. Rundle. As you can see, in 21-22, we're at an extreme low in our fund balance. The goal has always been, via our board, to get from 8 to 10%. And we believe we will get there slowly but surely, but we do not want to sacrifice programs, classes, etc. What we were able to do at the end of 22-23 was to bring it up to about 2.6 million, and slowly but surely at 3.7%, we're moving in the right direction.
The importance about a fund balance is that the state does not pay us in equal allocations per month. One month we might get 5%, the next month we get 8%. The biggest month is July, which is 12 after everybody's gone. So we have to have the reserves to make it on those months that we do not receive a lot of revenue from the state. That's why the fund balance is so important for a school district.
And just adding one more thing onto this, I definitely get questions as to what caused such a steep decline in our fund balance. And one of the biggest reasons for that is when the federal government was investing in schools through what they called ESSER, and that was the emergency relief funding due to COVID. They based that on free and reduced lunches or lunch counts in school districts. Being a school district that does not have a large number of those students who qualify, our ESSER dollars were very small, just over $1 million. So our school board and district at that time knew we needed more staff in our schools to help come out of COVID, for hybrid learning, for in-person learning. And so we really kept staffing levels high, even though student numbers were getting smaller. That's continued across the state with many other districts. We were, as Director Sullivan likes to remind me, the bow wave. We ran into a lot of the challenges earlier on. Now you're starting to hear other school districts who are running into that same challenge that we had, and looking to districts like ours who have been able to come out. But as we hit down towards rock bottom with our fund balance, we knew we needed to make some changes and start moving in a different direction. And a lot of that required our human resources team thinking about how do we match our enrollment and our staffing and put that together. So I want to bring in Director Battersby and Director Burns to talk a little bit more about the human resource aspect of all of this.
So for the staffing that Kay Adams was just talking about, we're apportioned by the state at kind of less than we actually staff our schools. And we're also funded by the state for the salaries and benefits at a lower amount than what we actually pay. So the critical gap right there is $42 million in what's apportioned to Mercer Island School District, and then we actually spend $60 million. Oops. I lost the thing.
It's the wrong one.
There we go. Sorry. So the number of positions funded by the state versus local levy, that's another piece. So the state funded 299 full-time equivalent positions. The local levy funds 133 full-time equivalent positions. And then the actual is 432 full-time equivalent employees that we have. The state salary inflation for this year was 3.7 IPD. That's the inflationary
Implicit price.
What's the last part?
It's the implicit price deflator. It's essentially your cost of living adjustment that they use for public schools.
And so the state pays us this IPD for the 299 state-funded positions, but not for any of the locally funded positions. But all 432 get a salary increase. Sorry. So when you spread that out among the 432 employees, that equals 2.55% spread across all positions in our district. There we go. So our actual staff mix, when you look at it, separated by administrators, certificated staff, and classified. For the administrators, we have 24. These are our superintendent, the directors, all of our principals, assistant directors, and the state allocation for that is 16. And again, the state allocation is for head count, and then it's also a certain dollar amount, and neither of those equal what our staff actually is. For the certificated, which is all of our teachers, our ESA nurses, counselors, librarians, psychologists, all of those folks, we have 267 FTE, and the state allocation is 232 FTE. And then for our classified staff, that's all of our paraeducators, the office support, custodians, registrars, bus drivers, all of those folks. We have 141 FTE on staff, and the state allocation is 67. So you can see that there's a big difference there between what the state funds us and what we have on staff.
So how this all relates is about 87% of our budget is actually staff. So, and it's our obligation and our belief that we want the best staff we can in front of our students and working with our kids day in and day out. And so we take this sort of disparate funding that we have from the state, because we're staffing at a higher rate and we're paying them more than the state believes they're worth. And we still try to attract and retain staff. So you can see over time, and this goes back to 17-18, which is when you had the McCleary fix, where overall we have outpaced inflation in terms of actually paying the staff that we have. Each of the colors represents a different group. Most of our staff are represented staff, meaning they are part of a union or represented by the union. We have two units. We have a classified and certificate unit, and then there's a smaller non-represented group, which are prof techs and administrators and some of our maintenance team. But overall, most of our groups and our largest groups have been paid at a rate that is had increases that outpace inflation, which is 26.3%. But at the same time, you can see most of that happened back in 17-18, 18-19, when there was a true up of what across the state the professional wages for our certificated professionals. But over time, you can see that the IPD it doesn't meet inflation. If you look at the last slide, it was 3.7%. That's well below the 8% inflation rate. So it's not something that we've been able to sustain. So the fact that we've kept up at all is really because of the McCleary fix. Oops. As we try to attract and retain staff, understanding that we are not sufficiently funded to pay our staff what we think they're worth, or to have as many staff as we think we need to provide high quality education to all of our students, we have a couple of guiding principles. The first thing is in our value, vision, and mission that's set by the board is that students are the priority. So what's best for kids is what drives all of our decisions. That's from the finance side and from the human resource side and the learning services side. And then with respect to employees, and it sort of dovetails in, we want to employ our employees with competitive wages that fit within the available resources. So we work with our labor unions, we work with the non-rep groups with something called a meet and confer process, which is similar to bargaining, to try to make sure that we're passing on as much as we can to our employees, such that they want to stay here. And we have competitive wages so we can get people to come to Mercer Island, to want to work with our kids, and provide them with quality education. But it's not always easy. Some of the impacts on staffing is enrollment. So as we're trying to make these decisions, enrollment drives our revenue. And so if you have unstable or declining enrollment, it makes it harder to attract and retain staff. So those dips that Dr. Rundle was referring to earlier, those sort of precipitous drops from the COVID years in enrollment makes it really challenging to keep paying and staff and keep up with the increases. The other thing is the implicit price deflator, IPD, which is that cost of living adjustment, that's not always known. And so it's unknown variable as we go into bargaining, which we are doing again this year. And that's the process by which we negotiate with the labor union. And that's really an opportunity for our staff to have their voice in what their hours, wages, and working condition look like. But that makes it more challenging because we don't know what that is going to be. The same as with legislative changes. So there have been some changes, so some things have gone off, but there was a suggestion, one of the bills was a $7 increase for paraeducators. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's a variable that we can't count on until it actually occurs. In terms of budgeting, unsettled employment agreements for both the represented and non-represented groups makes budgeting really hard because you don't know what you're going to have to be paying our staff, and with 87% of your budget being controlled by people, that makes it challenging. Statutory requirements make it challenging as well because we have to make adjustments to our staffing if we're going to reduce staffing within certain statutory windows that don't necessarily align with the legislative changes, the enrollment finalization. And also there's increasing unforeseen costs. Material costs and changes in liabilities can make it challenging to know what our overall budget is going to look like, and it can have impacts that ultimately will impact staffing.
So we're going to kind of head into the final piece. I just want to remind those of you who are online tonight that if you want to submit questions, you certainly may, and we'll do our best to answer a number of those before we end this evening. But to kind of take a look and just high level, what do I hope that our community is taking away? On the successes, that we're in a great financial position, even though that fund balance is still way lower than we wanted. We wanted to be able to cover 2 months of operating costs, including all of what Director Battersby just talked about with insurance and utilities, but also our staffing. And so we have a long way to go to get there. And we're not going to do it overnight. By increasing overnight, we know that it would have a really negative impact on programming and opportunities for our students, so we're going to do it in a very smart way. We also repaid last year the $2 million interfund loan balance. We did that within a year to minimize the cost related to that, particularly because we did have to pay that back to ourselves with interest. But it's been a multi-million-dollar turnaround. If you think that we started last year with about $1.75 million in the bank, but we owed ourselves $2 million, one could argue we were actually starting from behind. But we grew that fund balance thanks to the great work of our district. We've also been avoiding what we call binding condition, which is where you get into a situation as a district financially where OSPI, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, or others have to come in and intervene. And we've been able to avoid that. And I think we're going to unfortunately see that coming into the news more and more with some of our neighboring districts in and around Puget Sound region and across the state, just because of the financial conditions that we're in right now. We're also living within our means. We know that we can't spend that fund balance forever. That savings account dries up, so we have to make some tough decisions. And we have some of those tough decisions ahead. But we also have some opportunities there because we want to maintain the programs and services that make our school district such a great place, not just academically, socially, athletically, but for the whole child. So we still have some work to go. Our goal this year is to get to a 5% fund balance if we can by increasing bit by bit. We know that we were downgraded on Moody's, and we want to think about how do we reposition ourselves over time. We want to shrink that financial exposure of a low fund balance and then maintain that staffing flexibility so when we need to run a smaller section, or we need to add a classroom for 4th grade or at the middle school or high school, that we can do that along the way. So the timeline of what this looks like. We're out here right now being transparent, as I said, with all of our schools, with you as a community, having open, honest conversations to build trust. And as we head in, we just hit the halfway section, or mark of the legislative session. They have about 30 days to go, so we'll get some clarity around any of the legislative changes that are coming. Right now, our middle school and our high school are going into that time of setting their schedules for next year as students are enrolling. We're getting ready to enroll for next school year. We're looking at our elementary numbers, starting to talk to our Mercer Island Preschool Association partners, how many preschoolers might be coming, how many kindergartners and private schools might be coming into our 1st grade. So that all happens throughout the spring, and literally we're watching that every week as we're moving forward. So we'll head into the latter part. We have bargaining, as Director Battersby mentioned, as we renegotiate our contracts with our labor partners with MIEA, and then of course our Breakfast of Champions and our Mercer Island Schools Foundation that our community has been so gracious in supporting, which has direct benefit to our budget. So with that, I do want to thank all of you for attending. I want to thank our team for being here tonight. And all of the support that you continue to offer us each and every day, sending us students who are ready to learn, excited to be at school, and in return, preparing our staff in the best way possible. Let me turn it over to some questions and take a look at kind of what we have. One of the questions that I wanted to go back to is, can we waiver in students? And between choice transfer, open enrollment, waivers, and other districts have come up with some things. They're all pretty synonymous, and so just to recap on that, we can certainly look at our open enrollment options, and that's something, as I said, that the board is contemplating right now, and we're providing them lots of information, and I'll continue to work with our school board on that, knowing that there's a wide range of opinions about open enrollment, but in the end, we've got to do what's going to be the best for our school district, and that's what we're really thinking through right now. Had some questions too from our PTA advocacy and others, especially around the where the legislature is right now. So I do have a cheat sheet on this because there's a lot of moving parts right now. Really appreciate all of the support we've received around our regionalization attempts. Regionalization, as Director Sullivan was talking about, and it bled in also into Director Adams, but thinking about that 18% that we get from the state, they apply that to state funds coming to us, and that's an acknowledgement that it costs more to live in King County than, say, other parts of the school district. Well, one of the things they don't let us do is apply that 18% to our levies, so our levy dollars don't stretch as far. There were some bills that were proposed, Senate Bill 5956, House Bill 2215, and thank you to those of you who have been out there testifying. Unfortunately, it looks like both of those bills are not going to make it out of committee and onto the floor for further discussion. We are not giving up hope. This will be a high priority again next legislative session, next year when we have the full session. Another one that we're watching closely are our bonds and looking at what's happening with bonds. There's a lot of discussion about whether or not the bond threshold for passing should move from 60%, which is where it currently is, to 55% or 50%. The House had a bill in going into committee to reduce it to 55%, the Senate to 50%, and it does look like both of those did not make it out of committee right now either. So especially small districts having trouble passing bonds, or a school district like ours, as you're starting to hear, that we're contemplating a bond in 2025. That's some bad news right now, but we'll look to the future on some of that. On the positive front, we talked about our materials, our supplies, our operating costs are going up, just like all of our home costs are going up. So we're looking for some relief from the state there. The good news on that on two fronts, it does look like there might be some small enhancement, probably $250,000, and that's related to House Bill 2494. You might see us start pushing this bill a little bit. While not a large number, any number will help right now. And the other one, as Director Battersby was talking about, is Senate Bill 5882. The companion on the House side is 1960. Both of those bills would be adding money to the prototypical school model for our classified staff. So instead of targeting just a one group, like bus drivers or paraeducators, this would be enhancing the staffing model across the board. Again, I don't think it's going to be drastic numbers, but it's about a $255 million package or so on the MSOC side. And then on this side, I haven't seen the numbers yet, but we're going to be pushing hard for those down in Olympia as well. Other questions here. The special education budget right now. Great question on that. We are not seeing any relief right now or proposed relief from the legislature in terms of getting enhanced funding for special education. That's a really challenging piece for us because right now, when you take our federal dollars and our state dollars, we're actually overspending that allocation by $6 million. We believe that's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for our students and whatnot. Now, we do recoup through the diligent work of our teams and our families working with our teams. We're able to have compliant individual education plans. So we're bringing back close to $2 million from that. So that $6 million shrinks to about $4 million, but that's still $4 million out of levies in the general fund that we're not able to put in other areas because the state and the federal government are still not funding special education. $1 million on subs, typical across districts. Do we have a higher rate than normal? Not in the Puget Sound region. I think it's a great question to ask. We are talking a lot about this with our neighboring school districts. Because the school districts range in size so much, I haven't asked that direct question, so I can't say that it is absolutely commensurate. What I can go off is anecdotal information, and that is, we know we have a sub shortage. Credit to our HR team again, though. We've been able to attract a lot of new subs into our system. Some of you who are parents or living in the community are some of our fantastic subs as well. That delta, though, is the problem that all districts see, and that's simply because the state only funds us for so few numbers of sick days with 4, and yet we know that some of our staff members are sick or their families are sick, and so they may need more days than that. Any others, Ian, in terms of coming through? Don't hesitate to keep the questions coming. Tonight is not our one night. This isn't our only opportunity. Please email us, engage us. We're here to support our community. We're at our best when you're hearing as little as possible from our teams because it's all happening in the school district. But the district office is here as the great support or the ultimate support for our schools. We try to keep as much money as close to our students as possible in the hands of our educators so that we can continue to provide a world-class education. Thanks for joining us tonight. We will provide updates along the way. This presentation will be online on our website as well as an attachment to the slide deck. So again, thank you on behalf of our team and all of our schools for all of your support. Have a great night.